have open conversation for 60 minutes, followed by about 30 minutes of Q&A. Because we do want to let these guys get to sleep by a decent time, I am sorry to say that because we probably will have a lot of super chats tonight, super chat at your own risk. I'm sorry to say that, but we probably almost certainly won't get to all of them. And some of them, you could say we're going to be kind of picky with looking for the best questions we can, and just to give you that heads up front. So with that, I want to let you know we're very excited as Eric and also, or I should say Eric and James will be kicking it off first, and they're going to have, as I mentioned, that split opening, and then we're going to have open conversation, closings, and Q&A. If you have a question, fire it into the old live chat, and if you tag me with @ModernDayDebate, it makes it easier for me to see it, and super chats will push your question to the top of the list for the Q&A. With that, thank you so much. The floor is all yours, Eric and James.
Yeah, well, thanks for that great introduction, and thanks for having us again. Race
2 seconds. So sorry. This is my mistake. This is really special. Forgive me for doing this. I forgot to mention, we have a very special video. Someone wanted to wish the debaters luck. And so I do want to show this. My mistake. I jumped the gun there. I'm very excited for this one, but I do have to show this because it's a face you may recognize. So let me just show this clip for all of our speakers. Thank you. And another welcome from a special guest. With that, I want to say thanks so much, Hunter, for that wish of good luck for all 4 of the speakers. And with that, we will kick it over, as said, to Eric and James. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, of course. And good. Always good to see from Hunter Avalon. I think I can speak for all 4 of us when I say definitely our favorite YouTuber. But yeah, race is probably the most pertinent discussion we could be having right now. One of the most pertinent discussions, with cities on fire, white monuments being toppled, white people being attacked in the streets for defending said monuments and being criminally charged for defending themselves. But what's been made clear in America over the past few weeks, especially, this is something that's been playing out since the country's founding, of course, but what's been made especially clear as of late is that diversity is not working. Diversity is a failed experiment. Racial egalitarianism is a failed experiment, and it's not working for whites who are being disenfranchised, who are being subjected to physical violence, over-policed, pushed out of positions of power, whiteness being effectively criminalized in many ways, the right of whites to self-defense effectively being criminalized in many ways. But it's not working for blacks either. And to say that it's working 100% for one group or the other, it's not true. I mean, there are some legitimate grievances, and we can quibble with the particulars of these. But blacks that feel that they rightly feel that the system, despite everything it's giving them in terms of advancement, affirmative action programs, so on and so forth, it isn't for them. It feels alien. They don't like being governed under a system that they correctly identify as being of European origin. So nobody's really getting what they want from this. The only interest being served from diversity is from forcing these largely incompatible groups together. The only interest being served is that of global capital, that of the elites. This is making class solidarity impossible. Diversity is being used effectively as a wrecking ball to destroy the last vestiges of normal, healthy American society. That is part of the case we're going to make today. We are going to, of course, talk about crime and race and crime, the causes of crime, and all of the above. But that is, I think, the general meta point that people need to take home, is that diversity is not working for blacks. It is not working for whites. The only interest being served is that of global capital. And with that, I'll hand it over to Eric Stryker.
Okay, great to be here, everyone. Let me start off by expressing disappointment in the fact that instead of having a conversation about race with 2 blacks, we're having a conversation about it with 2 white men who have appointed themselves spokesmen of the black race. What does the average black man on the street even think of 2 gay white liberals deciding the fate of their communities for them? According to Varsh, we wanted to debate blacks because black people are dumb, and it would be an easy win for us. But I've had incredibly fruitful conversations with various members of the black community, from Congresswoman Cynthia McKinney to members of the Nation of Islam, the Black Hoteps. What was remarkable about all these conversations is that I saw almost eye to eye with them on everything. One important view I share with black leaders, from Muhammad Ali to Malcolm X to Louis Farrakhan, even Van Jones, is the hatred of you disingenuous white liberal scum. As Van Jones said, the white liberal is a bigger enemy to the black race than any Klansman. Muhammad Ali mocked a British TV announcer as a self-hating weirdo in an interview because he said he wanted the races to mix. Malcolm X accurately stated that Jews and liberals are cynics who pretend to be friends of the Negro in order to use them to increase their own power. I can find videos of Malcolm X praising George Lincoln Rockwell. Can you name any black who has ever said anything good about a white liberal? Sure, they'll fleece them for money, but blacks love the treason and hate the white traitor. Good for them. The only systematic racism in America is against white people. In today's America, between 1 in 5 and 1 in 4 blacks, a significant overrepresentation works for the public sector, a place that provides reliable middle-class jobs with health care, paid vacations, and other benefits. Public sector workers are unionized at a rate of 35%. Compared to private sector unions, which are 6%. The typical public sector worker gets 22% higher wages than their private sector equivalents. On the other hand, white people are 77% of minimum wage employees, another massive overrepresentation. These are the shitty jobs with no health care, no labor rights, and always dead ends. White overrepresentation among the working people is by design. A study released last year in the Journal of Experimental Psychology by Aaron Cooley found that when people are given white privilege training, they're far less likely to empathize with the white working poor, while their sympathies increase for blacks. Is it any wonder why fake socialists who promote white privilege bullshit like Vosh love to make fun of rednecks and hicks for their low status? Is it any wonder why all the bankers and capitalists are promoting white privilege bullshit? This is an ideology for oppressing white workers. It's no surprise that once again, capitalist Goldman Sachs simp Destiny and communist Vosh are fighting on the same side against the white working people and the West. James and I will proudly take a stand for our folk and for the pride of European civilization. As for the police, I got no love for the blue. I remember Daniel Shaver being executed as he pled for his life. No fucking congressional hearings there. I remember that murdering pig is walking the streets drawing a taxpayer-funded pension. I remember Jeremy Martis, a 6-year-old boy shot to death by 2 fucking black pigs. One of them is now free. It later came out that one of the black men that shot this little boy targeted his father for assassination because he wanted to fuck his wife. So give me a goddamn break about this systematic racist bullshit. The entire system is anti-white. That's my piece.
Okay. Destiny, do you mind if I go first?
Yeah, knock yourself out.
Yeah. All right, well, that was a fantastic piece of performance art. I would like to remind the two people I am debating that the subject we are debating is, in fact, racism in the criminal justice system. The statement we were asked to provide was this: all else equal, African-American people are treated worse by the criminal justice system for no discernible reasons not directly, or at least indirectly, influenced by racism or race-based policies. And I had wondered coming into this, with the totality of evidence on our side, what approach you would take towards rebutting those arguments. And it is clear to me now that theater, as I had anticipated, is indeed the approach you will be taking, because you did not say shit about the actual subject of discussion. Instead, it was the same vague, performative, conspiratorial nonsense you could read off any poll post. So let me actually bring some data into this conversation. The evidence in favor of the idea that black people are discriminated against in the criminal justice system is overwhelming. It is uniformly reified not only by private academics, but also by government institutions, from the FBI to the Bureau of Justice Statistics, that in every level of our criminal justice system, black people are treated disproportionately poorly. And to that, the common response is this: well, black people may get shafted in this way and that way. However, they do more crime. So, in all actuality, they're being treated fairly. No. These studies account for every conceivable socioeconomic confound that is typically used as a means of obfuscating the truth of the matter. we have evidence that black people are, with all other factors apart from race meaningfully accounted for, infinitely more likely to be stopped by stop and frisk procedures, more likely to be stopped by police while driving, more likely to be hit with harsher sentences, particularly with regards to mandatory minimums, more likely to be sentenced to the death penalty. I mean, I could read out all of the studies I'm looking at right now, but I imagine we'll have time to go through them one by one. That is the subject I am interested in discussing, not some vague conspiratorial bullshit over whether or not people taking down statues of Confederates means this country is anti-white. And to you, Destiny.
Yeah, wow, I didn't know we were doing theater intros to this, but I would like to point out that I think it's very funny that on one end we have Alsup, who is saying diversity is not working for the country that is literally the head of the world right now, both economically and militarily, and then another guy who has deluded himself into thinking he's European, I guess. But yeah, I mean, narrowing the focus of this conversation onto the criminal justice system and focusing how blacks are disproportionately impacted by said criminal justice system is the reason why me and Vosh are here today. I hope that we don't spend the majority of this debate pandering to these random, stupid talking points about how blacks are different in some other area that's completely and totally unrelated to this discussion.
You got it. And with that, we will go into the open discussion. So thank you, gentlemen, for being here. And I'll be, just to let you know up front, I'll probably be more active just because I expect this might be a little bit wild, but the floor is all yours.
I'm feeling
Sure.
calm.
Well, I'd like to begin by addressing this idea that there is a multitude of studies showing that blacks are, as Vaush put it, infinitely more likely to be stopped and frisked, which, of course, begs the question, well, why would that be? Is this just the predilections of racist police officers that are stopping and frisking blacks for no reason other than evil white racism? Or is there a factual basis for why some groups may be more likely to commit crimes, thus more appropriate targets for a stop and frisk policy, for example?
Let me add something to that, too. Under Mayor Bloomberg, whites were twice as likely to be stopped and frisked as proportional to the violent crime they commit. Blacks are wildly overrepresented in all crimes in New York City, and yet whites were twice as likely under Bloomberg. Bloomberg laughed about this on the radio, by the way. And that was specifically done to create an equalist outcome.
Right, and so it's one thing to say, to compare the percentage of the population to the percentage of those that are stopped and frisked, but you can look at actually those that are arrested and convicted of murder, and the rate of stop and frisk for people such as that, or for blacks in that case, the rate of blacks arrested for murder versus the rate at which they are stopped and frisked, and it is disproportionately against whites. Whites are disproportionately stopped relative to the percent of violent crimes they commit. I'd like to begin, if we're going to talk about studies, we can talk about a study from Washington State
We don't
University.
have too many points.
Can we do these one at a time? I'd like to, because I know that the goal is to like put out as much stupid shit as possible. The first thing that you brought up, the idea that like, so a common tactic is to say like weasel words, like, well, blacks commit way more crime than whites, and then you know, whites don't commit as much crime as instead of actually like looking at the actual figures. So, for instance, if we were to say that like there is a good reason for black people to be pulled over more than white people, then you would expect to see that those pullovers are actually like accomplishing the goal of like finding more crime. This just doesn't seem to be the case, though. So, for instance, an analysis of 4.5 million traffic stops in North Carolina shows that black and Latino drivers are more likely to be searched than whites, okay, given the population. However, despite that, there are still more profitable searches turning up white motorists having contraband. And then this study has been repeated in Nashville as well, where even if you look at the amount of stops, even if you look at the fact that, well, they commit more crime, whatever the fuck that means, when you actually analyze, like, well, how likely are they to turn up contraband or to catch somebody for a crime, they actually aren't being able to justify these stops with these numbers. It's one of the reasons why stop and frisk has been phased out so largely in New York. It's just not good policing. Even if we throw all the social justice, whatever aside, and all the feel good or whatever, if we just look at the raw data, stop and frisk is just not a good way to catch crime. And then this idea that you can say, well, maybe there's a reason, maybe it's because they think they're more likely to commit blah, blah, blah. What you're doing is you're justifying racism. You're basically saying, well, maybe
I got the
it's more black.
2019 studies here for the crime rate. 93%
we're not talking about
of all
this.
murders
That's
in New
nothing
York
to
City.
do with what we're talking about.
93% of all murders in New York City were committed by blacks.
This is, you're getting excited, Striker. That has nothing to do with what we're talking
86% of
about.
rapes were committed by blacks and people call
Okay, forgive me for doing this. I hate doing this so early. I got you all on mute. Forgive me for doing this so early. But just we come back to you, I promise, Striker, but just because there were a lot of points that I know Destiny wants to get a chance to address as many as possible. Promise we'll come back to you, but want to kick it back to Destiny.
Yeah, okay. he'll use his European data to catch back up, I'm sure, or his European DNA. So the thing that I'm trying to focus on is that the idea that even if black people do commit more crime, that doesn't justify the increased number of stops. We can hide behind this idea that black people commit more crime all day. Neither me nor Vosh are going to dispute that. That's obviously true, but that's not a slam dunk. The point is whether or not the total amount of extra stops that black people receive compared to white people can be justified based on the extra amount of crime they do, and that's just not borne out anywhere. Again, we can always talk about the high crime that blacks commit or whatever, but it just doesn't explain the massive disproportionate amount of stops that black people receive compared to white people, and they don't have the numbers to justify it.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that. It's very often the prerogative of these types to just, no matter what evidence you present to them, they lean back in their chair, put their finger to their chin and say, well, 1350. We understand that there is a disproportionate rate of criminality between the races here in this country. What we are arguing is that the judicial response, the criminal justice system's response to this imbalance is disproportionate to the extent of constituting racial bias. If the bias is not explained by the crime statistics, then those biases are unjustified and therefore, by definition, racial biases of the system, hence systemic racial bias.
We can kick it. I think, Eric, you had a point you wanted to get to.
Yeah, well, if 96% of shootings in New York City are committed by blacks and Puerto Ricans and Dominicans, it actually makes absolute sense to check more of those people for guns. I mean, it's just common sense. Furthermore, you don't interact at all with the fact that whites, who, again, are marginal in the terms of representation in crime in New York City, are twice as likely, because in comparison to their crime rate, 2 times as likely, Bloomberg said this, he admitted this when he was mayor, to be stopped and frisked, just so that they can even out the numbers. So if there's any institutional racism there, it's against whites.
Yeah, and you could even argue that the problem with stop and frisk was that it wasn't stopping enough black people and enough Hispanics and Dominicans, et cetera. Because if you're looking to catch people with illegal guns in New York City and you have 96% of shootings being committed by blacks and Dominicans and others, then it bears to reason then that an appropriate response from the criminal justice system would be to 96% of people selected for random stops would be those that are doing the shooting. But moreover, we can understand why blacks might feel uncomfortable with that. Right? These are uncomfortable realities for African Americans to experience, that they are more likely to perhaps have police encounters because they're committing more crime. They're more likely to be sentenced more harshly because they're more likely to have prior convictions. Right? So all of these things lead to them feeling uncomfortable. That said, this is a system, a criminal justice system that was created by people of European descent, by white Americans, to police white Americans.
I just found their North Carolina study, just real quick. I found their North Carolina study, and it did say that the contraband difference was 32% on whites, 29% for blacks. What that study didn't include, of course, typical dishonesty, is that the blacks had warrants and the searches there are mandatory.
Right, so and that's the other thing is when you talk about these studies, if you know about how these work, what will happen is
a lot of points. So just
can I just address the stops? Just one piece of fact about that, and it's not a new point. But when a police officer engages in a stop, they will run the license plate, and what happens then is dispatch will tell them who the driver is, who the registered owner is, and whether or not they have warrants. In many cases, this then necessitates an arrest if there's an outstanding warrant, and we know that what is the number? Like 1 in 5 black men will spend time in prison in this country. Blacks tend to have more warrants than whites do. So thus, you would expect to see a higher rate of stop and a higher rate of search. Maybe not as much contraband, but even then, 3% difference. We're within the margin of error.
Let's kick it back over. Let's kick it back over just because there's a lot of points. For
a lot, people. And very few of them are relevant. So first of all, I took a look at the 2019 New York City shootings by race statistics that you just cited, and it seems like from what I'm looking at, the arrest rates correspond proportionally, almost exactly, to the rate of victim and suspect, meaning that at least in the case of shootings in this city during this year, there seems to be a relatively proportional rate of arrests to crimes committed. I don't know how exactly this is evidence of some sort of anti-white bias. In fact, I don't know how this is relevant at all to what we were talking about. But yeah. Additionally, with regards to the pullover study that you just looked at, you accused us of dishonesty for not mentioning the fact that warrants were a part. Of course, warrants are a part of decision making with regards to searching vehicles that are pulled over. But the fact that there are more warrants proportionally on Black people is in support of our argument, because less Black people proportionally had contraband in their cars, meaning that even with the distortion that you allege, by the way, I don't know if you're aware of the extent to which that actually influenced the available data, there was still a disproportionate rate of searches to contraband found. Destiny, was there anything in particular you wanted to jump to?
Yeah, I guess one of the really disappointing things about these conversations, and I already see where it's going to go, is that typically if you don't have an actual like data set to back up your argument, we start like reaching to random data. So for instance, for the specific question of, and it's funny because you're even centering on New York City, like this is your slam dunk argument. So what I would expect to see from you guys if stop and frisk was effective is some sort of data showing that, oh, well, once police implemented stop and frisk, either number of violent homicides by firearm decreased, or once they implemented stop and frisk, they were able to procure far more firearms than were before. There's a reason why you guys don't have that data. It's because you know this is a bullshit argument. You know, you can vaguely mention the crime rates of Black people in New York City, but that's not really supporting any argument whatsoever. If you want to defend stop and frisk, I mean, I would love to see some data that points to stop and frisk being a good program. You know, initially I was more sympathetic towards it because, yeah, Black people commit more crime. Maybe it makes more sense to pull them over in some areas. But one of the big reasons why stop and frisk just kind of fell out of favor is because it just didn't work that well. It just didn't really turn up that many more firearms in New York City.
Well, one very important point I need to make about the warrants and people being pulled over is when someone is pulled over and they have a warrant, this will necessitate an arrest. In almost every case, this will necessitate an arrest, which then necessitates a search. So let's say we have two examples, right? We have a Black person being pulled over who has a warrant and a white person being pulled over whose car smells of marijuana. Now, the white person who's being pulled over whose car smells of marijuana, this will be a reason for a search. A police officer will search their vehicle and then contraband will turn up. Now, every Black person with a warrant is not driving around with contraband. So the idea that they're being arrested for the contraband, this is a misrepresentation of the data. Now, again, it actually is shocking that 29% of searches of Black drivers turned up contraband, because many of these were not predicated. The probable cause for the search was not identifiable smell of drugs or visible drug paraphernalia. These are all probable causes. These were warrants.
Do you have any data on how many of those searches were initiated by warrants?
Do you?
No, I don't, but I'm not making the claim.
No, but we do have the data available that there are more outstanding warrants, or there's a disproportionate amount of outstanding warrants for African Americans than for whites.
I'm sorry, regarding this data set, did you just imagine a correlative factor that you imagine disproves the data, or do you actually have any evidence?
Are you really going to say that in North Carolina there's not a disproportionate amount of blacks?
Let me check Destiny over here, because Destiny just straight up lied. Lied about stop and frisk. Like, this is what he does.
What did I straight up lie about?
Confidently lies. So we got the data here from New York City. The homicide rate before stop and frisk. Homicide rate was 31 per 100,000 in 1991. After Giuliani implemented broken windows policing and stop and frisk. I mean, this is something that everyone knows that New York used to be more dangerous.
Yeah, I love the fact that you're citing the highest crime rate in U.S. history in 91.
Mute him, because he always does this when he's losing.
Hey,
so
don't be so mad, okay?
We'll come right back to Destiny and Rush.
Here's the 1991, 31 homicides per 100,000. 2013, that was Bloomberg's last year as mayor with stop and frisk, 3.3 per 100,000 homicides. Okay? That's a massive drop. Okay? From fucking 31 homicides per 100,000 to 3.3 per 100,000. That's post and after, that's before and after stop and frisk. So you just lie.
Do you have evidence that's because of broken windows policing policy, or does that correlate to a general downward trend of violent crime across the country?
Well, yeah, even across the world. Like, the 90s were the most violent point in all of U.S. history. Like, I could literally point to any spurious correlation that I want and say, well, the reason actually was because I was born in 88 and I was like the savior of the U.S. and everybody looked to me and stopped committing violent crime. You know, you could see 3 years after my birth that happened.
You notice how the older I get, the less violent crime there is in America? I don't know. I think I'm starting to have an influence.
Correlation that we should be concerned about?
Yeah, we can be silly, or we can look at the nationwide rate decrease in crime. And I think the nationwide decrease in crime, and correct me if I'm wrong, but this was around 30% or a 30 to 40% drop in violent crime nationwide, which is which is superseded by that 90% drop that Stryker just pointed out. So, yeah, we do have evidence
So
here.
you're looking at an outlier. 1991 New York City was literally like, have you seen Escape from New
Well,
York?
that's
Like
what
Snake
Destiny
Plissken?
questioned me on. That's what Destiny.
Yeah, but
Well,
that's
actually,
no.
I
He was
think- I
talking
think-
about evidence for
Did
broken
the
windows policing in
homicide rate in New
general.
York City drop? The answer is yes.
Nobody
Okay,
contested that it
Stop and
dropped.
frisk. Wait, have you
Now-
done research for any conversation ever?
nationwide falls in crime is frankly the criminal justice bill that's always talked about. You know, Trump is always attacking Biden for supporting the criminal justice bill, where Hillary Clinton and the Democrats called blacks predators and so on. They basically just put all these black people in prison. That's why the crime rate went down.
We're pivoting a little bit.
You want to let them out, okay? That's another reason why the crime rate nationwide went down. Okay, they just put all black people in prison.
Slight pivot.
Okay. Yeah, there you go. Anyway.
Yeah, so as we were saying, New York City in 1991 was about as much of an outlier as you can possibly get when it comes to the murder rate in this country. So to take that one specific country and then all of the dozens and dozens of policies that it's implemented over the past few decades to mitigate that crime rate and go like, oh, well, broken windows policing, in spite of the fact that there was a gigantic nationwide drop in violent crime, and broken windows policing has been implemented in other countries, in other cities, and has not been found to have those same positive effects, really doesn't speak to the strength of your argument right there. I would argue that New York City was in a uniquely bad place, and it fixed itself in a number of ways. Some of those ways were more effective than others.
And none of those ways, just because you're saying so, involved stop and frisk or broken windows policing. All right.
None of it,
But
none
again,
of
we
it,
can
none of
look
it
to the
had anything
nationwide
to do. The fall in crime in New York City had nothing to do with the police or a change in police tactics. That's what they're saying.
No,
This is
wait,
the
wait,
nation-
I'm sorry.
You should demonstrate that. Demonstrate that.
Can somebody here find that clip?
We can. If I can finish this, we can demonstrate and look to the nationwide decrease in violent crime compared to New York's decrease in violent crime. What was happening nationwide? There was no nationwide stop and frisk. What was New York doing? They were taking violent crime very seriously. They were profiling accurately, relatively accurately, those that were likely to commit the violent crime. And so the crime rate went down. The homicide rate went down. I don't know. And you're saying that New York fixed itself. I mean, come on. You want to demand evidence for, do we have evidence for stop and frisk having any effect? Well, this is one of the most preeminent policies pursued in New York, and it led to a decrease in violent crime that beat the national average. So that seems to be compelling evidence right there.
Right. Well,
If
here's
it was, then
oh,
you should have a
sorry.
study for it.
Oh,
like
what-
that's so easy. Like if you're going to say that, like, oh, well, stop and frisk definitely led to a decrease
I
in
will
violent crime.
post
Why are
this. I
you
will post
comparing?
the comp stats
no.
for you in the chat?
These aren't-
I mean,
it's-
Hold on,
so
let's hear
we're-
from Destiny.
Yeah, so we're past freshman level of high school in terms of arguing where you can just throw a stat out, right? Like generally when people do studies, they will do a comprehensive analysis of all the tactics implemented by a certain department. They might go county by county. They might have control cities that they'll compare New York City to look at a variety of different policies to see how they impacted the crime. Not just like, well, here's one stat and it went down, dummy. I'm right. Like, come on. Like, this,
Yeah, like,
this is the easiest part of the conversation.
Literally correlation, causation, conflation right here. But I found a study. I'll help you out a little bit. So here's a study on factors which can be attributed to the decrease in crime over the 1990s. And there's a segment for factors which do not seem to decrease to the criminal rate in this country, entitled Better Policing Strategies. It ends with, thus, while the impact of policing strategies on crime is an issue in which reasonable people might disagree on given the lack of hard evidence, my reading of the limited data that are available leads me to the conclusion that the impact of policing strategies on New York City are exaggerated and that the impact on national crime is likely to be minor. So this is a meta-analysis of existing studies that are done on the decrease in crime for over the 1990s. I can link it in chat if you
Yeah, I really enjoy this this bit of like freshman level going on JSTOR and like finding typing
better than
studies.
having no data also.
We do have the data. No,
When's that?
the crime rate
I
went
mean,
down.
the idea that
it's just ridiculous.
yeah, the crime went down. We have a multitude of statistics which we've presented, and then to say, oh well, no, because that's not on JSTOR. So well,
Also,
actually,
you have stats, not analysis.
Well,
There's a
hold on a
difference.
second.
Stats out of
let me-
context
let me-
mean
let me-
nothing.
Let me get in on
Come
here.
right back to you.
Listen, the murder rates in places like Baltimore and St. Louis and places that don't have New York City style stop and frisk, the murder rates there are atrocious. Chicago, the south side of Chicago, places like that. So there's a massive gulf. Are you going to literally deny
Do you have any data
that
on
New York
this?
City? New York City is the most safe, one of the most safe big cities in America, if not the safest. This is common knowledge. It's Sunday after Saturday style common knowledge. And if we have to sit here and debate that, then it's just ridiculous. The homicide rate went down drastically after stop and frisk. But let's pretend for a second. Because what I was really the reason I wanted to talk to black people instead of two disingenuous white liberals.
Can we get to the relevant points?
can we actually hurry up?
Can we not do this? I don't
We
want
can. No, I'm going to fucking do it.
He's gonna do it.
The reason why is that I want to talk solutions.
It's calming for him.
Because I'm willing to accept that black people may perceive that a white cop or a white judge or a white jury may discriminate against them. And you know what? There might be cases like that. I'm not saying there's not. The point is, what I'm saying is, what is the solution to that? Now,
are you conceding the argument?
Excuse me?
That's cool.
No,
So you agree that there is criminal
what he's
justice
saying is
bias
there may be a perception.
No,
that's what I
no,
said in the
I'm-
opening. is
I'm-
that there may
I'm
be a
speaking-
perception among blacks. There may be a perception
Yes.
among blacks.
Ah.
They're being treated unfairly because they look at a white judge and they look at a white prosecutor and say, well, 1 + 1 = 2. That I'm going to jail not because I smothered that toddler like Reese Bowman was an 8-month-old who was smothered. by
You
a black
make
caretaker.
fun of that line of
let
thought.
me-
Wait, you
let
make
me-
fun of
let me
that line of
finish.
thought, but that's
No,
unironic in what you're doing.
Well, let's
Let
get
me-
back to the main point.
Yeah,
and
can
then we'll
I
go back.
finish the sentence?
Yeah, about black
Is
people.
Right, is that they may have a perception they're being treated unfairly, but that's not the case. So the problem that presents itself to us is how do we address this nationwide problem where 15% of the population or so feels like they can never get a fair shake in the system? Can we even build a system where everyone is governed by the same laws and criminal justice system? What Stryker and I will argue is that that diversity and integration is not working because you will always have these perceptions of unfairness as wrong as they may be, statistically wrong as they may be. So what do we do with that?
Well,
Okay,
the first
so
thing
that-
we have to do is real quick. I'm sorry, just real
Go
quick. Then
for
you go. The first thing we have to do is we have to figure out the first step to solving any problem that you learn at any stage in your life is to identify the problem. So if they have a perception that they're being untreated or that they're being treated unfairly, but they're not actually being treated unfairly, well, then the solution is going to be a hell of a lot different than if they are actually being treated unfairly. So I don't know why we're trying to skip over that part of determining descriptively whether they are or not being treated unfairly. I think that's really important before we move on to some weird conversation about black people not being able to live alongside white people or something. I think it's good to identify whether or not they are being treated unfairly first. So just curious. So if we're just going to do the stats game or whatever, because we don't actually know the difference between citing one or two numbers versus an actual study done by educated people in the field, I've linked something in the Zoom group chat. So you can see that the biggest fall or decline in murder rate, right, after 2009 is actually coinciding with a huge fall in stop and frisk. And that the massive rise in stop and frisk from the early 2000s didn't really seem like it was correlated with the decrease in violent crime. Can you explain here, if stop and frisk is supposed to be lowering violent crime, why these numbers would be like anti-corollary like this?
Yes.
I'd like to add to that really quickly, if I may. And it would be very much appreciated if you would actually stick to the point and not go to this weird ancillary conspiracy bullshit about white civilization. I don't know why you're making fun of your perceived belief of how black people perceive the criminal justice system. You're making fun of them for what you consider to be an intuitive judgment when all you've been giving us is intuitive judgment. Well, look at Baltimore.
Thank you for
Look at-
clarifying the black point of view.
Look at these cities. There's crime there. There's black people. What more do you need to know? It's common sense. It's not surprising to me that you balk when provided actual studies from actual people who actually have the education to analyze
I can
data and come to
explain
conclusions.
the drop in crime rate in New York City. I can explain that. Can I explain it?
Explain the data that was just provided to you by
I'm going
Destiny.
to explain the data real quick. Black people are leaving New York City because they're getting priced out. The black population in the last decade has dropped by 23%. Does that make sense to you? They're just leaving. They're moving to other states.
So
The
I like
crime
how we've
rate-
moved completely from stop and frisk to, well, now it's because they're leaving. This is why studies are important,
No,
guys, instead of
it's
just
the
looking at like one or two
reason why
numbers. Because now if we
crime
say, well, actually,
part
it
of
didn't
it is
drop,
that.
it didn't drop as the same percentage, you're going to throw up another one. Well, actually, that was when BETV stopped showing like as much violent program. Well,
Have you
actually,
been-
that was because of blah, blah, blah.
Have you been to Harlem lately?
This is why we need
It's full of white people now.
Why did you just lie,
Where's
Stryker?
One
In
sec,
1990,
one
the
sec.
black population in New York City was 98.7%. In 2010, it's 25.5%. That's a 3 percentage point drop. You're saying that's going to account for the
I will
massive...
link you a demographic study from a black website.
I don't care where it comes
you don't
from.
care about it? Okay. here it
No,
is.
I just care about how accurate the
people
data
are
is.
leaving-
Are you suggesting blacks
All right.
don't have the authority to speak on these topics?
I think the person who
Of
has the
course
best
they don't.
idea
They're
should have the
fucking white
authority.
liberals,
Hey,
just like
listen,
Malcolm
hey,
X
listen.
All right,
As a white
wait,
guy,
I'm sorry.
Wait, hold on,
Back to the
wait.
main topic.
As a white guy who appreciates the importance of empiricism, I would not want either of you motherfuckers speaking for me in any regard. So no, I do not think that race is actually the
We don't
determining
speak for
characteristic
you.
for whether or not data is
We don't
correct.
speak for you.
Yeah, and
We
also
don't
let's be
speak for
real.
you.
If
We
you
don't
claim to
pretend
speak, if you claim to speak on behalf of Europeans, I mean, we might as well be speaking on behalf of
Yeah,
Come on, Stryker, Let's be
absolutely.
real, dude.
My
We
brother
will-
Destiny over here.
We'll kick it over to
Europeans
James and
and-
Eric
and
now.
whites in the New World have nothing
We'll give a
in
minute or two to,
Okay.
just to be sure, hold on, just to be sure there's order. We'll kick it over to Eric and James to give responses now.
Yeah, Stryker, if you want to finish what you're saying.
2000, what I was saying is that the black population in New York City from 2010 to now went from 28% in 2010 to 22%, and it keeps on dropping. Okay.
Wait, from what year to what year? I actually missed that. I'm not.
It's in the chat. You can look at it.
Okay, I'll look at it.
So black people are just leaving the city because they're getting priced out. You know who's pricing them out? It's people like you and Destiny who are gentrifying all these neighborhoods that they
What
live
does this
in.
have to do with
Harlem
our
is full of
arguments?
whites now. Harlem is full of white people.
No,
now
he's right
because
there. I've
white
got
liberals-
4 homes in Harlem right now that I exclusively lease out to.
Well,
my
I
families.
think it is.
People that
Are you
think like
denying
you.
that it's important if we're going to talk about the amount of black crime in a city? The amount of black people isn't relevant. Is that the suggestion here? Because I think it's actually very relevant.
What would be relevant is you addressing the
the
data.
problem is that like you guys
he's
haven't
getting
found an
mad.
actual analysis. You're just throwing out random numbers. First of all,
he's
I like how you
definitely-
started citing crime from 91, ignoring the fact that stop and frisk didn't start until like fucking 2002. Okay, so firstly, that's funny. Okay, that you go back to the most violent point in history, and then you try to draw a line between then and now, in times when stop and frisk wasn't even implemented. And then instead of actually like having an actual analysis by an actual educated person taking into account a lot of variables, you're just like trying to throw like 2 or 3 stats here. Like we've got like monocausal things going on here. It's just like so stupid.
Likewise, they're trying to use a population drop in black people in New York City from 2010 to present day, as though that explains a crime change that took place from the 1990s. Yeah. Do you realize like you could have done some research beforehand, maybe found a couple of data points?
No, listen. Will you listen? Listen, it's pure snark, very little said. You guys are actively and maliciously misinterpreting what I said. Stop and frisk, which is a part of broken windows policing, right? It's associated with it. Would you admit that? You will. So, broken windows policing.
I thought you said you wouldn't speak for me.
Under Bratton and Giuliani from 1990 to 1992. You had from 1994 to 96. Bratton was the New York City Police Department commissioner. So the point is that Bratton, Giuliani, and Kelling were the ones that came up with the theory and implemented it in the early to mid 90s. Okay, and that's just so happens that the crime rate went down drastically. I'm not talking about crimes like pissing in the street and things like that. They did police that, but also crimes like the philosophy behind it is that people that are, and I'm not saying I necessarily agree with all of this, by the way, but the philosophy of broken windows policing is that if you allow fare evasion or people who get drunk in public and things like that, those people are more likely to commit more violent crimes. So they lock them up ahead of time. Now you could say that's wrong, that's right, whatever. It dropped the crime rate. Okay, it's just logic. The types of people that do that.
What year
are going to
was
be,
this implemented?
This is in the early to mid 90s. Look up Giuliani, Mayor Giuliani. I'm sure you know who that is, and Commissioner Bratton and Kelling. These were the guys that created broken windows policing and stop and frisk that was implemented at the same time.
Which one?
Broken windows policing is not a policy.
It's
That's
a
like an
it's like a
overall theory on how to
philosophy.
deal with crime. I don't even know if you know.
Right.
what
Again,
There
this
we
is
go.
splitting hairs.
No,
And
we're
I'm
asking
you.
Wait, that's
It
like
is.
saying what was your favorite policy of like
Thank you.
George Bush?
Thank
You
you.
say like
Thank
the
you.
war on terrorism or the war.
No,
That's not
it is
a
a-
policy. That's like an overall ideology.
It is
of how to
a
approach something.
guiding. Yes, it is a guiding theory on policing. That is true, and it is a theory that informed the policies they implemented as mayor.
Don't even
and
bother
police
explaining.
commissioner. I mean,
Let's
this
just
is
keep
this is
This
the
is
reality.
Tucker learned
By the
something new
way,
at least.
They had no arguments. So that's
by the
what they
way,
have to do.
1990 New York City black population 29%, 2010 25.5. So we see an approximate, what is that, 12% drop in the black population in those years.
And from when to when? What was the decrease
90 to
in violent
2010.
crime? 90 to 2010. And what was the decrease? He said 30 homicides to 3. And that little itty bitty 12% drop in the
Well,
black
combine
population.
that with
was
broken windows policing and stop and frisk.
100,000.
Oh my God! You know what would be a great way to combine that with? It would be done in a study. That would be
Well,
great.
let's
Could
study
you
the term-
imagine
the
that?
term
Like,
for
an
this-
actual
homicide rates of
researcher that
cities-
tried to correlate all these things.
The term for
study
this
what-
is superlative correlations, in which when you get a grab bag of data points that sound convincing, and you
like
start
a
piecing
homicide
together, you put them up in your cork board, you've got your twine and your push pins, and you try to make a story out of it. All we have to do
people
is
more
link
or less
studies.
likely to commit murder.
Wait. What does that have to do with anything? Remember earlier when I said
That's
that
very pertinent
all
to
you
the fact
types
that
do
the
is...
crime rate went down when more black people were policed.
Remember how I said earlier that when you guys are confronted with data more complicated than you're capable of understanding, you lean back and say,
here we go. Here we go.
1350. Hey, wait, really quickly.
Right.
Wait. I want to actually get this back on track really quickly, if I may. I hope nobody minds. Because we've been, I guess, arguing over your inability to understand data for a little while now. We got to maybe 3
You
of
guys
40
are splitting
studies.
hairs.
Hold up.
You guys are
Whoa.
splitting
I agree.
One
We
sec.
are. I agree. So how about we get to the other dozens of studies I have that uniformly
This is
inform
why
the
it's a waste
idea?
of time to debate white liberals. They're just cynics.
Oh, you're
disingenuous.
backing off? That
Well,
easy?
Well, I mean,
No.
this is an important
This is-
point, though. The idea that data only becomes valid when packaged by someone at a university in a certain way that agrees
No,
with you.
a classic
entirely-
anti-intellectualism.
That's
it's
a really good
not
point that James brings up. Like,
anti-intellectual.
yeah, but like the funny thing is that like any educated person listening to this, like the fact that you just said is an insult with standard practice, data isn't worth anything as a single stat. Of course, these are always contextualized. The fact that
and
you
we're
thought
giving
that
the
was some
context,
kind of
Destiny. We're giving the context for
you're
them.
creating
random
context.
data
You're,
points.
cre-
The
you're
idea that
creating
they-
context.
statistics are
No,
in
What
there.
we'll do is,
Unless
hold
they
on one
come
second.
from
Just
the
we're going to,
Eiffel
just
Tower.
forgive me. I've got everybody on mute. Just want to, what we'll do is change things up a bit with maybe 2 minutes from each side, kind of alternating back and forth, just to be sure that it's been going really well so far. And so it's at the same time bubbly. So where were we last? Who would be willing
I'd
to
like
defer
to move the
other?
conversation in a more productive direction, if I may.
I would, but I would also like to talk about this just for like 1 minute too, because it's just very important.
We can split 1 minute between us. You want to go first?
Sure, that sounds great. Okay,
You go
let's do
first.
it.
All right.
Yeah, okay. So like you creating context for a given stat isn't just comparing one number to another. That's not creating context. Anybody that's ever read a single econ study, a single sociology study, any study like this will know that when you actually try to measure the effectiveness of a given policy, there's a lot of things that go into that work. So for instance, you might see if other cities that are comparable in population demographics or socioeconomic status had similar or different policies. You might compare the effectiveness of the policy given different types of populations. You might do it over like a time scale. There's a lot of different things you have to keep in mind when you're comparing policies between states or between like even a city and then prior in that city when you didn't have it. The idea that you think that you can just throw up one stat when I could point to like any number of other stats, for instance, like the number of prison inmates rose, the size of the police force grew, unemployment rate dramatically fell between 1990 and 1999, 25%. Like all of these things can be correlated with like decreases in
You're making
burglary,
our-
homicide,
you're making
all
our
these other
point.
things.
We're at
I'm
about
not making any point.
35.
Anyway, go for it.
45
Yeah,
seconds.
and I'll
yeah, sorry,
finish.
okay,
I'll
so-
finish from my
go
side if I may. So yeah, we can run this back a little bit. So a report on jury selection showed that between 1990 and 2010, state prosecutors were about twice as likely to strike black people eligible for juries in criminal cases as opposed to 26% of white people. It was double even after taking account of other correlative factors. The authors of this study testified in court, saying the odds of this taking place with no implicit bias with regards to race were about 1 in 10 trillion. We have studies on implicit bias with regards to mock jurors. We have them in plea bargaining. We have them in charge sentencing. We have them in death penalty sentencing. The amount of data on this, for you to get knocked down in the weeds of like, well, what year was broken windows policing, the policy
something
of broken
you guys
windows policing
pressed.
implemented? No, we didn't bring up New York.
Yes,
that was
you did.
guys.
People can rewind.
Okay,
it.
what we'll
We
do
can
is-
rewind. You guys started with New York City.
Yeah, we'll switch it.
the
We'll
point-
switch it.
why-
So that was
why
about
were
a
those
minute-
black
that was about a
jurors
minute.
struck?
Hold on a
Yeah,
second.
I'd like to make the
That
point
was
that-
about a minute.
See, why?
25. Hold
Find
on
a
second,
study.
gentlemen. All right. Well, that was a minute 25 from Destiny Bosch. We'll give the same to Eric and James.
Yeah, Stryker, just real quick. The reason why jurors will be struck as part of the voir dire process is prior convictions, right? And so if you have prior
Accounted for.
convictions,
Accounted
if
for.
you have prior convictions, then
Accounted
you
for.
will be struck.
Hold on.
Hold on. Sorry.
No, not you, Bosch.
Just
okay.
clearing it up so he knows where to go
I
from
want to
now.
hear this.
Yeah, and also, I mean, this analysis is only focusing on white jurors. I would like to see a similar study, as you apparently have a wealth of them, on black jurors and whether or not black jurors have biases towards whites. And this gets to the bigger point here is that you may be able to find some whites or some blacks that have implicit biases towards each other. This is not borne out in the way the system treats people, for sure. But I mean, the point being, the idea that blacks cannot be biased against whites, I would disagree with that.
No. Wait, I never mentioned the race of the
One
people
sec.
who struck
they've still got
jurors.
about 30 seconds.
Let the European go.
Yeah.
If you
Well,
want
here's the thing. Here's the thing. The concept of a Bronx jury is very well known. It's an implicitly and explicitly biased black jury. Not to mention the fact that jurors, like James said, are often struck because they have criminal records or they have some other issue going on. So, I mean, all these questions always beg the question. You know, why? Why are blacks treated slightly differently than whites? Why are they more likely to get struck from a jury? Why are they more likely to be stopped and arrested? And the question, and then the answer where we disagree, we both agree on the fact that blacks are more likely to commit murder. I mean, I'm sure you guys already agreed to that. So the question is then,
About time.
yeah. So the question
If
is,
you want to.
And time.
You guys
I'd love to respond. So again, that was accounted for. I never mentioned the race of the people striking the eligible jurors. And additionally, I love the fact that whenever presented with data you're unfamiliar with, you don't know anything about this study. You don't know any of its control variables, when it was conducted, how it was conducted, the selection size, the sample rate, the p-hat. You don't know anything about it. But you're like, well, something has to account for that bias. It can't be racism. Maybe there were we accounted for priors. Maybe they smelled worse. You would go to anything. And this is the reason why we get to point to studies and you get to point to out-of-context data points.
Cross-reference.
Because it is very easy.
Are blacks more likely to be felons? The answer is yes.
Wait. I think that's really important. That has literally nothing to do with the study that I have cited.
Absolutely it does.
No, that's accounted for.
That's called racism. Or what if you're trying to say that like a jury is more likely to be biased against a black person because
I'm sorry, I misinterpreted that. If you're saying, well, those black jurors were more likely to have been criminals, that's accounted for. If you're saying, well, they were more likely to have been struck because the person doing the striking believes they're criminals, that's literally racism you're defending.
So we agree with each other then. That's fine.
You're just pro-racism and we're anti-racism. We're not arguing over whether it exists, just whether or not it's good.
That's about a minute 20, so we'll kick it over to James and Eric for a minute 20.
Yeah, I mean, the idea, though, that the jury selection in and of itself can it be looked at to explain the disproportionate sentencing?
It's not. I've got data on that too.
One sec.
Data. Sorry. No. The idea that the jury selection in this very specific case. Where was this study conducted, by the way?
Let's find out. Michigan State University College of Law. Let's find the population. You can keep talking while I find the population.
Yeah, sure. So the idea that this is an explainer of racism in the criminal justice system. I mean, this study actually is an outlier when you look at other studies that
what other studies
that examine. Well, I'm about to mention one, Dustin, if you'd let me finish. That, if, for example, study from Washington State University finds that police officers, by the way, these are the police officers that are killing unarmed black men, supposedly, that police officers actually hesitate longer before shooting black suspects than whites.
What does that have to do with the
jury? You get the death penalty if you.
Do you know what a pivot is?
One sec. I got to give him 20 more seconds.
Okay,
Yeah,
sure.
Well, one last thing. One last thing is that Destiny already admitted that the crime rate went down because there's more cops and more people in prison. Okay, that's basically what we all agree on. The question is, why are they mostly black, the ones in prison?
That had nothing to do with the data.
That's what Destiny said.
No, we were arguing whether stop and frisk was the
more cops, more prisoners, plus stop and frisk.
I don't think he ever said
in the New York context. Chicago has 7 times the murder rate as New York City. Philadelphia 6 times the murder rate.
This has not again.
Chance to respond.
Do we notice?
They don't have to stop and frisk.
Do we notice the pattern? We notice the pattern every time. No actual way of comparing these data points, just throwing out of context data points. It's actually embarrassing. I'm cringing over here. Do you want to respond to the actual data point that I cited with regards? Again, you can find it. The study writers testified under oath the likelihood of that taking place. Those disproportionate odds being about 1 in 10 trillion, unless racism was involved. They testified that in a court of law. Of course, perjury is a crime. If you'd like to look over that and attest to that specifically, that'd be fantastic. I don't know what policing has to do with jury selection, but
I'm just quoting Destiny. Destiny said the crime rate went down because there's more police and more people in prison. That's what he said. So I'll agree with him 2/3 of the way there. I think in the New York City context, the reason it's the safest big city in America was until very recently, until you anarchists turned it into a jungle.
Do you want me to go to an easier
anarchist
study?
Anarchist riders. Until very recently, it was the safest city in America by per capita.
Go to an easier study for you?
You compare it to places like Chicago. You compare it to places like Philadelphia. You compare it to places, other big cities. And they have no stop and frisk. And the crime rate is exponent murder rate.
What you think New York City is comparable to all those other cities
on racism?
New York City is one of the
dead bodies on racism.
We'll kick it over to Destiny.
I'm just the idea that you think that New York City is comparable to those other cities. New York City is one of the most unique cities in the United States of America, right? That like picking out like things particular to New York. If we've seen anything, with the whole coronavirus stuff, like we can see that New York City is like a pretty unique place in terms of like how it sits in the world. I'm not moving anyone. You haven't met the incredibly low bar that we've already set.
Hey, Bugman, I lived in New York City.
Calm down, Strike. Calm. Whoa there, big boy.
Another minute. We got another minute left.
Why? I don't know what to say. Like when you're throwing out, like I lived there. Like I went out on the streets every day and I collected unbiased data on the crime rates and I looked at the
There's not even anything to respond to be honest.
I don't know what to say. This is like cheating because if they say a bunch of dumb shit for 2 minutes, James, and I have nothing to respond to, what am I supposed to do with my time?
Yeah, we can. I can only
ready for this strategy.
I can throw out a new study if we want. So in this study,
let's address my study first. Actually,
what study?
Let's address the study from Washington State University. I believe it was 2013 that found that police officers. You can talk about jury selection.
Oh yeah, that study is right. Yeah, we can give you that one. We can give you that one, and it doesn't impact anything else.
I have never made the claim. I have never made the claim. This is a white on black thing. Only systemic bias against black people committed by white or black cops, white or black judges. Doesn't matter.
And it might be that police hesitate more before shooting a black person than a white person. That has nothing to do with the broader argument, though. Like, that's great that you have that one.
Well, I'm sure it does. I read it, it would, though, doesn't it? Because what you're contending is that there is a nascent racism that is that pervades the criminal justice system. And if that were to be true, you would expect that to be present in the frontline enforcers of that criminal justice system.
Can I take a second to explain systemic bias?
Allow me to finish my point here. And this study from Washington State University found that police officers are the most likely to hesitate 1.61 seconds before shooting a black suspect compared to 1.37 seconds for a white suspect. And that might seem like a small amount of time, but in a critical life or death situation, that is very important. And so again, this idea that if the police officers, which again are the frontline enforcers of the criminal justice system, you claim to be racist. If they were to be racist against blacks, for example, then they would be less hesitant to shoot them, right? But they actually hesitate longer for blacks than they do with whites.
Okay, so again, we never made any counterclaim on that one. It makes sense that given all of the racial antagonism surrounding the police brutality that they commit against black people, that they might be more hesitant in some instances to open fire on black people. We never made any claim counter to that, and it has nothing to do with our broader claim. Do you think it's a little bit funny that I'm like, here's a bunch of like meta-analyses on broader racial injustice, and you say, well, here's one study. It takes the cop 1.2 seconds longer to kill the black man.
That's exactly what you're doing, Vaush. And by the way, would that not be an example of an anti-white bias? If you guys want to present the argument that there's an anti-black bias,
now just demonstrate it in the entire criminal justice system.
Is evidence.
We're talking about the totality of the criminal justice system right now. We're talking about a disproportionate thing that black people face at every single level of law enforcement, not just whether or not white cops are more likely to pause when they're shooting white or black
police
people.
Engagements, apparently. But this is
we are talking about police engagements. Hold on. Do you think that the only type of police engagement?
So what's Black Lives Matter about? If it's not about shooting unarmed black men, what the
We're not talking about Black Lives.
We're talking about systemic racial bias.
Hold on.
Oh my God. Hold on. I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Stryker, call me there. I'm sorry. If you want, either you or maybe if you've got a caretaker can check your email. You can actually go and look at what we're supposed to be talking about. It's not Black Lives Matter. Maybe you're in the wrong debate. I'm not sure if there was like a Daily Stormer episode that you're missed or something, but yeah, I mean,
they want an easier topic.
It's so pedantic. It's so pedantic.
No, it's wait, listen, buddy, my friend.
Pedantic. It's the point.
My fellow. Calm down. My fellow.
Hold on 1 second.
The discourse. My fellow European friends. Okay. We came here to talk about whether or not there is a systemic bias against black people in the American criminal justice system, and the evidence to that effect is very compelling. We acknowledge that study on cop fire delay times. It does not rebuke our point in any way, shape, or form. And it's entirely possible for a criminal justice system, which is generally biased against black people, to sometimes have disproportionate outcomes against white people. For example, I believe that for the most part, we live in a pretty sexist society against women, but men get shafted in some pretty specific ways that I'm happy to acknowledge. But when I'm trying to talk about society at large, it's a little weird if we're looking at a totality of data and you keep pointing out like family courts. And that's what we're doing right now, essentially. So if we may, I'd like to move on to another study. I'm very interested in hearing how you're able to divinely talk about which correlative factors they weren't able to account for in this one. In this study, two groups of mock jurors were given a collection of race-neutral evidence from an armed robbery, with one group's alleged perpetrator being shown to be light-skinned and the other dark-skinned. These mock jurors were significantly more likely to evaluate ambiguous race-neutral evidence against the dark-skinned suspect as incriminating and more likely to find that dark-skinned subject guilty. Now, there are no other confounding variables here. It's a study. It's an experiment. There's nothing else. It's all mocked. And yet, in spite of that, the jurors, black and white, were more likely to find criminality in the actions of the alleged dark-skinned perpetrator.
So the black people are racist against black people, too.
We're talking about systems here.
Well, are systems made up of people, or are they just
Well,
magical?
I mean, even if we
clouds in
grant
the
that,
sky?
even if we grant that and say, yeah, black people could be racist against white people as well. I mean, the problem right now is that white people have the predominant power in the criminal justice system. So it seems like that's the problem that we should be addressing.
Where are you
That
getting?
would
Where's your
be-
study to show that?
Sure.
You have a study for that?
Wait. Are you skipping?
Where's my study to show that white people are
Yes.
the predominant power in?
Yes. Where's
I
your
mean, I
study?
could do a composition of Congress.
Show me a
people that
study.
are like-
Are black people, are white people more likely to be, I don't know, the mayor of a black majority city?
We don't need to
more
sink to the
likely-
bad faith
Are
arguments right
white
here.
people the police chiefs in every place from St. Louis to
This
Detroit
actually
to
tracks.
Seattle.
You think Western
Really?
civilization is being destroyed, so you must think
Oh,
black
now
people
you
are
change
actually
the
in charge of
topic.
America. That actually
I
makes
don't-
sense from your
No,
perspective.
wrong. Let me correct you on that.
You think
I don't
Obama's still the shadow president?
I personally have no personal hatred for black people. I don't. And I don't think they're in charge. I think Jews are in charge.
I know.
That's who I think is
We
in
know.
charge.
Don't
So
worry.
if you want to talk about that, we can have that another discussion about that. But
I know
don't
you'd
want
like to move to that
sponsors.
because it's another opportunity for you to use a bunch of
Oh.
spurious conspiratorial claims without looking at any evidence.
Meanwhile, here you are talking about this white privilege.
Do you want to
nonsense.
respond to the study that I have never said white privilege once in this entire discussion?
I want Destiny to show me a study showing that white people are disproportionately powerful.
Are you
in the criminal
pivoting?
justice system. No. He's
you really- are you
he made a
avoiding?
claim and he has no evidence to back it up.
Answer the question.
So, what question do you
Answer the
want to
question, Stryker.
What question?
Stryker! Why
Yeah,
were those
okay, you don't
mock
have a
jurors
question.
biased?
Why? Well, your claim is that black people are racist
No,
against black people.
nope. Our claim is that jurors, whether or not they're black or white, Asian, Hispanic, engaged in bias against dark-skinned individuals. Now, in America, where you are
Quantify
tried by
that
a
bias.
jury
Show
of your
me-
peers,
Show me statistics about that bias.
and yeah,
Show me
sure.
statistics
Yeah, here you
about
go.
that bias.
So in America, we are tried by a jury of our peers, meaning that our juries will be made up of black, white, Asian, Hispanic.
I'm
what
asking
have
you, what is
people.
the origin of that bias? Explain that to me.
Wait. So again, you know there's a bias.
No,
You're
I'm not
just
saying.
okay
I'm not
with it.
No, hold on. I'm not admitting that. I'm saying you're saying that all races are biased. Against
You're
black
justifying a
defendants.
racial bias right now. You're doing it. You're making my
well,
argument
that-
for me.
Calling people. First of all, I don't give a shit if you call me racist, and second of all,
It makes my
I don't
argument
care.
easier,
Maybe
if you
racial biases are real. I mean, men. I guarantee that there are studies that show men are more likely to be frowned upon by a jury than women.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
There's plenty of studies.
Yes.
So
And
is
then-
that
yeah,
because
and
of
then-
systematic misandry?
Bias, yes, against men in the criminal justice system. Yes, for violent crimes, men
Oh.
are significantly more likely to be sentenced, and I've talked about that on stream and in fact
So
done
that's
videos on it.
anti-male bias. then.
Yes,
You believe in
or
that,
I
okay.
guess too light on women. I don't really know, but it's one of those things. Yeah.
So what's your solution to that? Is
Wait,
that to
are you?
increase
So you
penalties
really
on
are
women?
pivoting? I actually just responded to your question, and you're unwilling to address the specific thing that I just said.
Are men more
you
likely
okay?
to be? Are juries more likely to be biased against
Why are you
men?
pivoting?
Because men can. Are juries more likely? Because I'm trying.
Why are you
the problem
pivoting?
is, if we talk about race, you're set in your ideology, right?
Why?
You have a racial ideology. You don't have a canned line for
Are
the rest of the stuff.
You
So here you go. If a jury is
Pivoting.
more biased against black people, what were the factors like the nature of the crime, the rap sheet of the black criminal, all of these things?
wait.
that
This is
come
an
into
experiment.
question-
There's no rap sheet.
Actually, I'm going through the thing right now, and he does bring up a good point because all of these crimes were stealing truckloads of Nikes. So Stryker actually just completely blew us out of the water on that one. Fuck, I'm sorry.
It's an
we have to move on to
experiment,
the next
Stryker. There's no other correlating factor you can
Like, I don't
point
think you
to.
gotta understand that these aren't real life people, right? They don't. These aren't.
Does he
I'm
know?
saying-
Who are we talking to?
What I'm saying is
also-
just
and,
like
this is
Jesse
another
Jackson.
reason. Hold on, you just
What
have
I'm
to hold on a
saying
second.
is just
Another
like
reason why
Jesse
it's
Jackson, just like Jesse Jackson said once that when he hears footsteps behind him and he turns around and sees a black man, he's a lot more scared than if he sees a
What
white
are we?
man.
Who? What are we
Black
talking
people-
about?
I'm sorry. Is Jesse
Blacks-
Jackson the secret fifth person here in this?
Juries are
I
more
don't know why
likely.
we're talking about
James?
Juries are more likely to be. Hold on a second. I'm getting a phone call here.
Yes, quickly find some time. No,
We do have one. Well, I want to make a quick announcement. We have something weird. We're both computers. I can't currently access the super chats. I think I just tweeted YouTube. I don't know if this is like for everybody or just me, but it is on both computers. So it's also on multiple browsers. Don't worry, folks. Working on it, but just want to let you know we. So maybe we'll just go a little bit longer than expected.
we
in
crashed
terms of-
YouTube.
I'm not sure what's going on. I can get them to load in the Creator Studio, but I can't pull them up where it, like has their own little like sub page.
That's okay. We were all getting a
I
little
got it,
heated.
got
I'm
it,
happy
got
to
it.
have the
Okay.
moment. I've loved
We,
chilling, taking a breath.
So we are okay now. Folks, gotta warn you, like at this point, it's going to be really hard for us to, if you're firing in a super chat now, it's going to be really, really hard for us to get to it based on how many we have, which looks like a lot. So want to let you know, like, super chat at your own risk. And if you guys had other points that you wanted to get to.
Yeah, and I would just like to make the point that I think we all can acknowledge that there will be if you're talking about a black person or a white person, an Asian person, any person of any race, there will be some built-in in-group preference there. Regardless of who you're talking about, people are naturally preferential towards their own. And so if we have then a system that by the way, does its best.
And why are the black jurors also biased against?
If I could just complete.
He's actually just completely making our argument for us. Yeah, go ahead and finish. And then we.
No, I'm saying that these people, it's natural for human beings to have some in-group preference. That is just a fact.
Okay.
So then how do you build a system that accommodates both blacks and whites, that accommodates these two different groups? And let me finish, Destiny, because the question then is, when you mention having a jury of your peers, can you ever really have a jury of your peers if that jury of your peers is not of the same race of you?
Right.
And I think a lot of blacks, this is one of their demands, is to have all black juries for black suspects. Now, I think that is a fair demand to make, and that's a demand that a black nationalist or black activists would probably make. And that's a demand that I think Stryker and I would make for whites as well. And so the only way to accomplish, if you believe it is possible to have this system that treats all people fairly, regardless of their race, is to have separate systems, to have separate courts of law, separate judicial systems, one for blacks and one for whites. And that would then solve the problem.
Black police, black courts, black juries, black judges for black people, and white people.
And that would then solve this issue. And by the way, it would be very interesting then to do that same study that you keep mentioning about jury bias and so on and so forth.
You still haven't responded to it, by the way.
Well, I'm making the point that if you then saw blacks, this black judicial system continue to be biased against darker skinned blacks, I mean, at that point, it's like, what do you even do with that, right? If that's how blacks are going to govern.
You've conceded.
I actually think that's a really good question that James also brings up. I think that we should come back and we could have a second debate on how do we address the racial biases that exist inside the criminal justice system. Because also just made a huge argument that we all have in-group preferences. White people are currently, make up the majority of like legislative branches of district judges everywhere. So we've already conceded the point completely, basically, that we are correct. I don't need to. Also, just conceded your argument entirely. You just said that we all have in-group preferences.
No, because
we don't need to find data to agree with.
Excuse me, can I finish my talk? As European gentlemen, okay, as European gentlemen, okay, with great traditions from Europe, okay, we should allow each other to speak.
Yeah, it's called America.
So,
I'm an American. Do not call me a European. Thank you.
Well,
like 50-50, European American. It depends on who I'm talking to at the time. But anyway, so if you can see that, we could come back and we can have a discussion on how should we sit here and address the problems of systemic racism. But if you're going to sit here and concede that systemic racism exists, then why don't
we have that discussion now?
Well, actually,
because we didn't prepare for that, and unlike you guys, we actually prepare for our conversation.
Well, no, I'd like to make a very important corresponding point to what I just said. Is that actually when you look at how whites are treated by the justice system, even though there is this in-group preference, whites are actually treated very poorly by this justice system in the United States. We can look at, for example, the right to peacefully protest. How are white peaceful protests treated versus black people?
This is completely, you don't want to get into this.
One sec.
Oh, sure we do. Sure we do.
This is some like tier 11 dumb fuck argument.
Okay, we can debate that at another time, but the point we're getting at here is if black people, whether real or not, me and James are not conservatives. We're not invested in a perfectly objective justice system at all.
We know.
I am willing to listen to black people. I'm willing to listen to black people, like in Black Lives Matter, who are demanding hospitals that are staffed and for blacks. We want the same for whites. Let's do that. The obvious solution to systematic racism, to the extent that
one sec. Let's let him finish. Promise we'll come right back to you.
The obvious solution to black people feeling like they live under a racist system is to give black people their own rights in their own system. Isn't that the obvious solution here?
Okay. Where do we?
I mean, I don't know who he's arguing against.
So
you'd agree.
Wait, hold on. So really quickly, okay, because trying to make any points with you people is like pulling teeth. So the argument is conceded. There is a bias in the criminal justice system in the country of the United States of America. Now, I would point out factors like even a majority black cities, there's still not a supremely large bias against white individuals who are tried in those systems. In fact, the opposite seems to be the case. And whereas black people in very white cities tend to have the opposite inflicted on them. So the idea that this in-group preference is some sort of neutral, socially ambivalent force that equally directs black people against whites and white people against blacks doesn't really seem to be true. The fact that you would try to defer to white protests as a sort of measuring stick for how white people are treated by our criminal justice system is pretty funny. If you want to have a conversation about what can be done to improve the disparity in our country's criminal and racial injustice, I mean, you're going to have to provide data. That an ethno-state.
Also, wait, before they respond to, I would like to say it's pretty funny that you think talking to people from like the Nation of Islam is like representative of black opinions across the United States. That'd be like me saying I talked to Charlottesville neo-Nazi marchers, and I talked to these people, and I think that their opinions are representative of.
Well, we have a Charlottesville neo-Nazi marcher here.
You and Vaush have thousands of progressive fans. You and Vaush have thousands of progressive fans and couldn't find a single black person to at least bring on as a fucking token.
Wait, we don't like tokenism.
Well, and I'd like to just add.
Right, you don't have black people at all. At least conservatives have their tokens.
I'm the streamer.
Back to what we were saying.
Have you seen the voter base? Are you serious right now? What do you mean?
Back to what we were saying. Back to what we were saying.
Strong African American Republican vote.
The factor of racism. You guys aren't letting me talk. Yeah, the factor of racism is 100% eliminated by having a system where black people have black police, they have black community leaders, they have black judges and jurors. That is entirely a non-factor. There is no chance of a white person discriminating or or an Asian person or any other kind of person like that discriminating on a jury or as a police officer or anything if we only have separate systems.
Then explain Ferguson. Ferguson. Led by black people, black police officers majority, black people were treated fucking horribly in that city.
I'm saying if
explain
is the original sin of white people.
Never. Wait, stop with all this self-persecutory bullshit. Yeah. I'm not interested in reading your fucking MySpace blog, okay? I didn't say shit about white people. I'm asking you if black people will treat black folk better and white folk will treat white folk better. Explain to me why Ferguson, as a federal investigation, was shown to be massively biased against its black inhabitants, in spite of the fact that almost
Ferguson was run by a Republican mayor. For your information,
if you want to look at the demographics of that city. Wait.
Ferguson has many white people in it, and it has a conservative.
What percentage? Wait, you're weaseling. You're weaseling.
I'm getting at is,
I mean, the idea is if you want to remove a variable, if we want to be scientific and remove the independent variable here, we can just remove diversity, right? And if you want to find how people treat each other. Well, it does, because then there's no opportunity for white racism or black anti-white racism.
We're not saying white on black racism.
On the criminal
we're saying systemic racism.
Listen, if you want to say black people,
one sec. Order. All right.
Okay. One last thing. If listen, I sympathize with black people that go to school and have to read Shakespeare. Go to school and it's named after some white man or something. I sympathize that black people don't feel any connection to this stuff. I totally sympathize because when I had to read fucking Chinua Achebe, I felt no connection to that either.
Care.
So the point I'm making here is that black people have a right to their own community, their own police, their own culture, and to be taught their own values in school. And I agree. Listen, the main black criticism here of the criminal justice system is that it's a system created by whites for whites to benefit whites. Whatever the merits of that argument is, I don't even care. Let's create a system for blacks by blacks and get it over with.
If you were correct, then it should be easy for you to find a study on how greater levels of black representation in city councils, mayorships, and police representation leads to a decrease in the disproportionately negative treatment of black citizens in that city. I guarantee you will not be able to find that study. As it turns,
I would just like to say that, in terms of talking about the breakdown for how we change a lot of this stuff, if we wanted to do a separate conversation on this, I'm really hesitant to do it on the fly, but I'm pretty sure me and Vaush between us have 20 different suggestions related to the war on drugs. It's funny, you guys brought up black juries, black people. Community policing is one of the big things that a lot of people actually want in this country. We could name 20 policies offhand. Yeah. I'd be super interested, Stryker, and your suggested realistic, politically possible policies that are going to get us to fucking kingdoms of different racial countries in the United States. Yeah, what a fucking pipe dream.
I look forward to being here's a policy we could maybe look at. Here's some studies on it. You're like, well, if we just had an ethno-state, we wouldn't have that problem. What would the discussion be?
Boring.
I'm not saying necessarily an ethno-state, but if black people want to live in their own communities with their own system, I personally think they have a right to do that.
So that would be the discussion. Just
Now,
back
you
and
two,
forth.
the white liberals that have crowned themselves the leaders of the black community.
Why do you keep
You
doing
may
that?
disagree. You may disagree that that's what's good for black
you the
people.
leader of the
I'd
white
rather
community?
have this conversation
One sec.
with actual black people and see what they want. Why the fuck do we have to argue with you about this?
Then why did you
guys
agree to
are
this
just here-
debate, Stryker?
You-
Stryker,
you
why did you
guys-
agree to this
you
debate
guys-
if you didn't want to talk to white people about this?
They didn't want to talk to
You
us.
guys-
Is what they didn't want
You
to talk
guys
to.
are just here to obfuscate things that white people and black people, by and large, will agree
They
with if they sit down and have a conversation. Well, you Jews and distractors and liberals, all the
doesn't have
shit
anything to say.
that you
Yeah.
people represent. You
Let's-
have the minority
we-
opinion.
Probably could go into Q&A
Is this
now,
what is it
or I
called?
should say closing statements.
So what is it called when the senator won't stop talking? Destiny?
Filibuster.
Filibuster. Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
So
I mean,
basically, the problem is that like they wanted to come and have this conversation. They wanted to like appeal to like one or two random numbers, like that proved the point. And then he realized, oh shit, I have nothing to say. Why am I talking to white people? Oh no!
And then instead of debating Black Lives Matter, we got Cuck Lives Matter debating.
Why are we never, this debate was never, so wait, first off, I would like to make a request to the moderator. James,
Sure.
can you tell me, one, if the statement of what we were going to be debating is known by all parties beforehand? Two, can you read that statement? And three, did Stryker know, okay, and I'm sincerely asking this, did Stryker know that me and Vosh were white coming into this debate? Because Destiny kind of sounds like a black girl's name. Maybe he forgot the last time we had a horrendously embarrassing conversation where we tried to say jazz wasn't real music. Maybe he just forgot that we were both white. I'm not sure. Can you verify those three things for me? I don't know how you're going to do this.
Destiny, Jazz. He must have been black.
I can do the first two. So
Okay.
if you guys would like, let's see.
My camera's on, right? You can see. I know that my lighting's a little dark right now, but like most people would consider me white. I would say the vast majority of Europeans that see me would probably consider me white.
Yeah, I met him. He's pretty pale.
You get to speak on behalf of what black people think.
Speaking of, we're not talking about what black people think. We're just going over some studies.
Because we haven't actually completed. I mean, we have not conceded the point that in the United States there is a rampant systemic bias against blacks in the criminal justice system. I still disagree with that, Stryker, and I still disagree with that.
Wait, also,
we
we
don't
think
care if there is.
Destiny. If I can get more than 15 seconds, James, that would be excellent. The idea that there is a widespread systemic bias against blacks, this is not borne out when we look at federal policing, federal law enforcement, for example.
In what way? What studies? What data?
What studies?
Wait, in what way?
I love it when he asks me for data. It's such bullshit.
Is London the capital of Britain? Show me a study.
Whoa. You're just going to appeal to that? Like, well, we can see by looking at federal data that you're wrong.
Wait, you think you can just beg the question on the entire argument?
Because Sunday follows Saturday. Show me the data.
1 second. I do have the phrase, if you guys want me to read the statement, I can. Otherwise,
for that.
it might
If I could finish the point that I'm making without an interjection.
if you want to finish this, and then I'll read the statement, and then we should probably go into the closings.
Yeah, so let's look at federal law enforcement, for example, the United States Department of Justice. The United States Department of Justice exists almost solely to identify white people in this country and charge them with federal hate crimes and prosecute them in cases such as the two men in Georgia who are being targeted with hate crimes charges. The man in New Mexico, white man in New Mexico, who defended himself against anarchists that were threatening to kill him, who is now finding himself the subject of a federal hate crimes investigation. Why, if there's a systemic bias at the system-wide level, you'd find it in the federal level.
Your counter argument is that 3 white people have been charged.
Let me finish. These are examples.
And where's the data?
Examples.
Examples aren't data, dude.
We do have
right, but well, James, hold on. Let me finish. If you had a rampant systemic anti-black bias in federal law enforcement, you would expect there to be similar hate crime charges against blacks when blacks do things such as say, "I hate white people" and attack whites, such as when blacks engage in violence against whites and express a racial animus. If you look at the statistics on this, which I will find for you in about 15 seconds, blacks are actually undercharged in federal hate crimes under federal hate crimes investigations, despite them committing more violent crimes. So we have a federal
hate crimes or violent
system.
crimes?
They are underrepresented in terms of them being charged for violent hate crimes. They are underrepresented in terms of being charged and investigated. They're under investigated.
Well,
for hate crimes.
the FBI doesn't even bother policing blacks.
What are we? Wait, can we? Wait, stop, stop. Come
You
on.
can look at. Hey, let me talk for a second.
We've been talking for a while.
You can look at the murder clearance rate since the 1960s. It's gone in many cities from like 90% clearance to 60% clearance. The FBI has no interest in that. Meanwhile, they'll send 15 agents to go investigate a fake noose.
Can you provide studies on this data?
There you go. Yeah, there you go.
Can you answer that? I mean, how do you?
We don't
There's
know.
no way to answer one.
Where is your study to explain
examples.
this?
This is there's not a
You
study
provided
for
the-
one-off example. I don't
Exactly.
understand. This is
Wait,
like
wait.
phenomenon.
Allsup was literally
The idea-
like, here's some.
reality doesn't exist unless it comes from an ivory tower.
Wait.
Let's
You
get
were
that.
literally
it's
just
not
like,
an
we can
ivory
look at
tower.
real.
Here are some examples. Wait.
Gentlemen,
I appeal to the moderator for
Feigning
me.
incredulity.
Can we get a response to
One
that?
sec. Just okay, everybody on the same page? Okay.
Okay, the idea of him like, here are some examples. Where's your study to explain it? What the fuck are you talking about?
Because your appeals are solely to academic authority, and that's fine if you want to do that. But we can look at the facts as they are.
I provide
And
the
we
studies, though. I don't ask you
we can
for
look
them.
at the facts as they are,
One sec.
and we can say are they true or not. And we don't need something to be blessed by the ivory tower academics for it to be real. We can look at real examples of
can we
real things
please
happening in the real world.
Can we please
Yeah, and you
start
know
off
these
next
guys.
time?
These
Wait, can we
guys.
please- hold on, James.
all the institutions are on their side.
Destiny, we got to switch it back.
Go ahead.
Okay, I just next time, because I fully admit I'm a pussy, I would have dodged this debate if he told me that we can't use any academic evidence. Because it's a huge waste.
Yeah, that makes it much
It's a
harder.
huge waste of time. Like if we were going to start off with like, well, studies don't count. We're going to have to go by news reports, like
No.
of the 3 or 4 examples
You're
that I bring
lying.
up. Like what a waste of fucking
You're lying.
time. Like, holy
You're
shit.
lying.
Like, dude, you literally, there are going to be people watching this and
Confidently
think that
lying.
you're paid opposition for the
Destiny
conservative.
is a
That's how fucking
self-described
stupid you look right now.
sociopath,
Like,
so
it's
he
so
confidently
stupid.
Wait, can we
Holy shit.
please calm? Wait, can we calm down? Let's
Actually,
just-
I have to go through my PayPal transactions. I might have paid for this opposition because of how fucking stupid you look right now. I don't even fucking remember right now. That's how embarrassing this conversation.
Back to the basics.
Yeah. So wait.
Let's
Let's wait.
talk
How about we?
distance.
How about we get back to the basics, which was James, the moderator. Would you kindly repeat to everyone why we came here and whether or not everyone was made aware of the debate topic before we arrived here in this Zoom call?
Is everybody good with this?
Yeah.
All else equal, African American people are treated worse by the criminal justice system for no discernible reasons, not directly or indirectly influenced by racism or race-based policies.
Okay. So that was what we were supposed to be talking about. Every single time you pivot off the topic of discussion, you defer to data points that are not contextualized, which is what you have to do to understand what data means. This is literally correlation causation. I learned this in middle school. Every time you do that, you are silently conceding to us the fact that not only are you wrong, you have no fucking idea what you're talking about. So in the absence of any available arguments on your part, and as boring as this is getting, I think it would be wonderful if we could defer to the comparatively intelligent chatters and the super chats in which they have thrown us questions.
You might be probably going to find more help there than for me
you
to-
guys weren't prepared at all to discuss solutions to this or anything like
Let's
that.
see.
That's because it wasn't
what
the
we
topic.
should.
No, that's
What
because
we
you
should
don't
do.
like the
One
solution.
sec.
No, that's
One
because it
sec.
wasn't the topic.
No, that's
One
not
sec. One sec, gentlemen. Okay, so what we'll do is we had discussed right at the very start before we went live that we would have these roughly 1 or 2 minute closings. So what we'll do is
James, real quick, can you read the context of the emails we shared, me, you, Mike, and James?
Now context is
where
important.
it's very important because we initially asked James for black people on the other side so we can discuss these solutions and so on.
Do you have a study on that?
Can you is that?
I'm asking you sincerely. Do you have a study on that?
yeah, I mean, I can. It's true. You asked for black opponents. I can pull that up and
Okay,
read it if you
well,
like.
what happened
No,
when
that's
Mike
fine.
Enoch saw that the conversation was going to be against 2 people that he knew he'd lose his shit over? He left.
Is it a waste of time?
Yeah, Enoch
There are
was
better things to
smart.
do.
He
If it's
backed
a, first
out.
of all, this is not a waste of time. Me and
He
Josh
didn't
are
back
making a
down.
lot
He
of
said
money
do
right
it in
now.
July.
Okay, so hold
No,
on. Number one, it's not a
actually-
waste of time. I'm making a lot of money right now. Thank you very much.
James,
And number 2, you had the
James,
opportunity.
Mike said he could do it in July because
You had an opportunity to leave.
This
You
is
started
such
with
a-
white.
this is such a
One
derail.
sec. To be fair, I've got a. What do you guys want me to read?
I want you to read the fact that Mike said he could do it in the debate in July because he's first of all he's doing stuff with the business. He's doing a bunch of other shit. Like there's a lot of projects going on. These people are not even worth his time. These 2 losers. So
It's true that Mike said yes.
But he didn't waste his time
business- That is his business. Things had ramped up, and that was why he was not going to be here. If you guys want to come back in July, I'm open to it. or if it's on another channel, we'll promote it, we'll tweet it, we'll do whatever we can so people see it there. But
Right. There you go.
That was the wait. You can't point to the first.
Show me the data.
part. You can't point at the first part of your negotiation and go, "Why didn't we do that? Where did we end up?"
You accepted the
You knew
debate
that you were
after you
debating
knew the
me and
opponents.
Rod. Yeah, like
let's
what? How
move on to-
stupid! Like
okay, so this is
that's
a
like
chance where
offering like 80K
why don't
for
we
a
do a
salary for a
closing?
job, and they come back at 60,
do
and then at the end of the month, they're like,
closings.
"Why didn't
Let's
you pay
go-
what we
we
initially
should do-
talked
let's
about?" Like, how
go-
fucking stupid are you? What
Let's
the
go to
fuck?
super chats. Let's go to super
we should
chats.
do-
Well, closing. So